Um, I'm Nancy Hoffman-Vaniak, and I'm CEO of the Greater San Fernando Valley Chamber of Commerce, and our Vice Chair of Government Affairs could not make it today, so I'm filling in for him. This is our very first Policy on Tap that we're hosting. We're going to have 5 others this year that will bring together government and industry leaders to discuss the pressing issues of the day, from today's topic on homelessness to healthcare, entertainment, technology, transportation, and more. We want to hear about what's working and what isn't, what can be done better and how, and discuss some big ideas for the future of the Greater San Fernando Valley. Today, we have 3 amazing guest speakers who will be discussing the topic of homelessness and sharing their thoughts. We have Lorraine Diaz, the District Director and Homeless Services Administrator for Council District 2. Councilmember Krikorian's caught in a committee meeting right now. Chris Perkins from the San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. And we also have former City Council Member and City Controller Wendy Gruhl, who now serves as Commissioner for the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, also known as LAHSA. They will be joined by our moderator and former Chamber Board Chair, Cindy Keitel. So before I turn it over to Cindy, I want to acknowledge our sponsors for this event, which is Cal Lutheran University and Southern California Gas Company, whose support helps make events like this possible. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy.
Great, thank you, Nancy. Well, before we begin, I want to explain today's format. Each speaker has been asked to give remarks on the topic for 10 minutes. They're going to be talking about their ideas, their experiences, their successes, and their challenges in addressing homelessness in the San Fernando Valley and also in Los Angeles. We're going to be ringing a bell at 1 minute. That's before the time limit. So speakers will know their time to speak is just about to close. So following the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A period, and our speakers will each have 2 minutes to answer a specific question. If there's time permitting, following that, we'll take questions from our audience via the chat window. So just a reminder, while our panelists are speaking, please keep yourself on mute. And let's begin. First, I'd like to introduce our very first speaker. It's going to be Lorraine Diaz, who's the District Director and Homeless Service Administrator for Council Member Paul Krikorian, and she represents Council District 2. In January of this year, Council District 2 helped open the Tiny Homes Village in North Hollywood, which will house more than 10% of the homeless population in the district, and Lorraine's been the liaison for this project. Lorraine, we look forward to you telling us more about the Tiny Home Project, the hurdles you faced, and how it's going. Lorraine?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting our office to participate in this event. Thank you, Cindy and Nancy and all of you. Unfortunately, Councilmember is still in committee, so I will.
Okay, let me get Eden.
You guys hear me? Oh, sorry. So on February 1st, just a few weeks ago, Councilmember Krikorian inaugurated the city. Oh, sorry. You know what? I'm so terrible. I forgot to share. Hang on just a second. Bear with me in my technical skills here. Let me get to sharing.
I forget I got the cowbell.
Sorry.
I'm just teasing.
Here we go. It's getting started and I realized you couldn't see. So here we go. Minimize you guys. There we go. All right, so like I said, on February 1st, we inaugurated the city's first tiny home village at Chandler in North Hollywood. The site has 39 tiny homes with a total of 75 beds. Oh, this isn't moving. Why is it not moving? Here we go. The city, is primarily looking at lots for all of these tiny home villages. This is the first, but we do have 5 more in the works just here in the San Fernando Valley. 3 of them in Council District 2. The city is primarily looking at lots that we already own that are located near existing dense homeless encampments. So this North Hollywood location was an underutilized park space that was directly across the street from the park and provided really no park amenities, just a lot of illegal dumping and graffiti, as you can see. So what is a tiny home? I wanted to give you a picture of what it looks like on the manufacturer's website. Pallet shelter, you may have heard it described as pallet housing. That's actually the name of the company that makes it, but as you can see, they're not made out of pallets, they're not even made out of wood. They are a cost-effective temporary solution while we build permanent housing, which takes longer, obviously. The original concept for tiny homes came from a general contractor who is also a firefighter, who set out to create easily deployable, reusable, lightweight shelters that could be used in a disaster response. So, you know, hurricane, fire, that earthquake we've been waiting for. These prefabricated and can be disassembled, reused, and fold flat for storage. So once, you know, let's say we solve homelessness and we have all these tiny homes left over, we can then, you know, put them away and save them for that big earthquake or whatever, you know, the next emergency will be. So this is the inside of a tiny home. They have a bed, you know, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here. Some built-in shelving. The top unit here is an air conditioning unit and the bottom one here is heat. They have outlets. They have room for a pet crate under the bed or under these shelves. They have an additional bed in case they'd like to be housed with someone that they were homeless with. So whether that be a spouse, a partner, an adult relative, or whatever their version of family looks like. So if they were previously homeless with someone and they want to be housed with them, they can be housed together, which generally isn't the case in our other shelters. You know, there's definitely a female side and a male side, and oftentimes that becomes a barrier to housing. So these colorful individual units allow for better social distancing during COVID. You know, it allows them to social distance, kind of quarantine if the need be. And they, as I said, they're pet friendly. The target population for these villages, each village, is people experiencing homelessness who are currently living in the immediate vicinity. So especially the most vulnerable. And I'm sure Wendy will discuss that, you know, prioritizing those that are elderly, those with pre-existing medical conditions, etc. This beautiful, colorful, Lego-looking village helps people take the first steps out of homelessness, because each facility includes, you know, besides the air-conditioned tiny homes that we described, they also provide shower and restroom trailer, a hygiene trailer that's actually off screen here. An administrative building that allows for case management on site. They'll be able to meet with service providers like the Department of Mental Health or substance abuse counselors, or really get access to those resources that they would have to go all over town for. Instead, we bring them here on site where they can access them, you know, help them get through the labyrinth of government programs needed to gain placement in more permanent housing. This administrative trailer also houses, and I'm sorry, I don't have a better picture of it, but it also houses the laundry facility. So they can do laundry on site. And during COVID, we also have these very far spaced apart picnic tables where they're able to have, you know, their 3 meals a day that are brought in from, you know, an offsite location. And, oh, sorry, I guess that's it. So this project aligns with all the work that we've done, you know, at our other bridge housing sites to respond to homelessness in our community. We've opened 2 other bridge housing facilities, and we have, you know, 2 other tiny home villages in the pipeline just in this area. One of the draws for, you know, the people experiencing homelessness to come into these tiny homes is the ability to lock their doors, the ability to have a sense of privacy, which oftentimes is lacking in our other bridge housing facilities. For many people, this has been, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, I'll tell you about a gentleman who was homeless for 9 years, who's currently living in our tiny home village at Chandler. And he said that he had never seen something so beautiful. So when they showed him to his tiny home, he said he had never seen something so beautiful. And in his 9 years of being homeless, he had never thought that he would ever have a place with a locking door to call his own. And so that was enough to give him, you know, the inspiration that he needs to say, hey, you know, I think I'd like to have my own apartment, or I'd like to take that next step. This is a good bridge to that next more permanent housing option. And I was going to say any questions, but I think you're doing the questions after, right?
Right.
Perfect.
Lorraine, are they also opening a couple of these in CD3 as well?
Correct. So there are 5 of these proposed for the San Fernando Valley. 3 of them are in our district and 2 of them are in CD3. Both of them are in Reseda. And we hope to have them all open by the end of summer.
Okay.
Shall I stop sharing?
Sure.
There we go.
So if you're done, I'll let Cindy.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Yes, I was going to say, if that concludes your presentation, let me thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I know we'll have additional questions for you. as we move through the content. So let's next move to a different angle on the homelessness problem. And we'd like to talk to Chris next. So Chris is the Center-wide Housing Services Manager for the San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center, a private organization dedicated to improving the mental health of individuals and families across the San Fernando Valley community. Among the services provided by the center include interim housing, and you mentioned about case management for the Valley's homeless population. Chris is going to discuss the challenges faced by the center and how the community and our government officials can help them serve the homeless community. Chris.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate being here. I've been working in the mental health industry, specifically in the community mental health industry in the nonprofit sector for almost 20 years now. 17 of those years have been right here in the San Fernando Valley, so it is an honor to take part in this, so I do thank you for that. And 15 of those years have been right here at San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. So what really comes to mind when I got this opportunity to talk with you all today is that, you know, no matter what my job description has been over the past 15, 17 years, I've always made it the point to do the work. Sitting down with our homeless community, sitting down with our homeless neighbors, talking to them, getting to know them has always been something that I refuse to give up. It's important for me to do so. And, you know, this reminds me of in the past week, I have completed 2 Section 8 applications for 2 of our consumers. And there's a part of me that just, I have to hold on to that. I have to continue with the work itself. And I thought I'd use these 2 consumers as kind of like as a basis as to show you what San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center does. We make it a point, it's a priority of ours to provide our homeless neighbors with appropriate mental health treatment. And not only treatment, but education, job skills training, independent living skills training, whatever it's going to take to help that individual not only move into housing, but to keep their housing. We have had a program in our agency, an independent living program that has been around for 20 years. And we still do things just like we did in the past. Of course, there's been changes. Everybody knows that there's been a lot of changes happening over the past 2 years. But we fully believe, and I take this to heart, that our homeless community, we have to provide them with what they need. We have to give them the skills they need to keep their apartments. So, you know, these 2 individuals that I filled out Section 8 applications for, they both had very similar stories. I think a lot of the community that we see, a lot of our homeless population have very similar stories. And for some reason or another, they were both homeless living on the streets. They were both in and out of shelters. They both did time in jail for a few months at a time here and there. They both had substance abuse issues, and unfortunately, over a long period of time, they sustained months and months, if not years, of trauma. And that changed their whole brain chemistry completely, and they developed severe symptoms of mental illness. And when we started reaching out to these individuals and working with them, like a lot of the population that we serve today, they weren't quite ready for that assistance yet. They weren't quite ready to accept the help that were offered. However, eventually they both did. They both said, okay, we give up because we are consistent in our outreach efforts. And they both agreed to come into one of our clinics. The center has about 30 different sites or 30 different programs all throughout the San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. And they said yes, which is the first key, right? Is getting our homeless population to say yes to being helped. And we were able to get them into our clinics, and we were able to get them in to see a psychiatrist, maybe get on medications. We were able to convince them to take part in intensive case management services. We were able to convince them to take part in psychotherapy or counseling. And when they got to a point where they were consistent in what they wanted and they had a good idea about what their goals are, we moved them into our transitional living. Now, transitional living has kind of taken a step back to permanent supportive housing in front, but our transitional living program is a model of success. Most clients that go through our transitional living, I'd be confident to say 90% of them stay housed once we get them housed. And while they're there for the year or 2 that they're there for, they get intensive case management services provided to them, if not weekly, daily, some of them. We go over the skills that they lost, the skills that they forgot. Maybe something as simple as opening a refrigerator and stocking a refrigerator, to turning on a stove, to turning on an oven, to mopping, to sweeping. All these skills that you and I take for granted because we've been fortunate enough to live in an apartment or live in a house. These clients, they forget these things. So we work with them and we get them to the place where we're able to say, you know what, there's a really good chance that you're going to succeed. And I was fortunate enough, like I said before, to fill out the Section 8 application for these two individuals. And in the next couple of months, they will both be signing leases in apartment complex that maybe our friends or our families or our neighbors live in as well. And if I was a betting person and I was sitting at Vegas at the roulette table, Nancy mentioned that there's drinking going on here, so I kind of thought about that. And that, you know, I was sitting at the roulette table and my option is red or black, you know, and the black was significant to a client succeeding in housing, and the red was likelihood that the client was going to face eviction. I would put all my money on black in these cases because these individuals received the intensive treatment and the education that they need to succeed. And I'm so excited to see that happen. One of the greatest things that I've seen in the past 5 years, 6 years, 7 years of this job is really the creation of permanent supportive housing. That is the answer, in my opinion, to homelessness and to ending homelessness and to eradicating homelessness, if you will. We have these amazing buildings now in our service area throughout the San Fernando Valley. I think probably a lot of you are familiar with them. Some that come to mind is Dave Street, Palo Verdes, Casa del Sol, which are buildings or apartment complexes where, you know, our most vulnerable homeless clients with severe and persistent mental illness are being given the opportunity to live. And they're living in these apartments. They have access to their own refrigerators. They have access to their own beds. They are amazing environments. The most amazing thing about them is, in my opinion, the first floor. And the first floor of these buildings are typically housed or staffed by people who are on site, by social workers, by marriage and family therapists. There are places for nurses to meet with clients and our consumers. And more importantly, there's people there that are able to and trained to provide them with the service they need to stay housed. And they're amazing communities. If nobody here has had an opportunity, I'd suggest that you reach out to maybe somebody at LA Family Housing and go see what they look like. Because in all honesty, housing our clients is important, yes, but keeping them housed is just as important. And the way that we're going to keep our homeless consumers housed is by providing them with the service that they need, especially the mental health treatment that they need. In summary, I just want to point out, you know, that this idea of homeless, this problem of homeless, this crisis of homelessness, you can't just take 10 minutes and talk about it, right? Or even 20 minutes or even an hour. It's a process, and it's a conversation that has to continue happening. We have to make the effort to have these discussions and to really realize the importance that our neighbors out there living on the streets right now, they deserve every opportunity that we can give them and that we can offer them. And that doesn't happen through one organization, that happens through a bunch of organizations, a whole continuum of care, if you will. So I'd like to also acknowledge in this meeting our partners at LA Family Housing, our partners at Hope of the Valley, our housing building partners of Clifford Beers Housing, a Community of Friends, Homes for Life, the John Stewart Company, to name a few. They've all been integral partners of our center. And that's what I have to say. So thank you for having me once again.
Cindy, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, we just unmuted me. Great. Chris, thank you so much. We're going to circle back to that. I think we've brought up quite a few things of interest to our group today, and we'll be back to you. So thank you so much for pointing out so many things that you've been doing and that your partners have been doing to help with this situation.
You're welcome.
Now I'd like to turn to Wendy Gruhl. And Wendy has served as council member for the 2nd District of Los Angeles, preceding council member Krikorian, before moving on to become controller of the city of Los Angeles. As a council member, Wendy developed a reputation for putting her constituents' services first. Wendy now serves as a commissioner for the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, a joint powers authority between the city and the county of Los Angeles. It assists more than 100 nonprofit partner agencies with programs to assist people experiencing homelessness. Wendy, you're just about to go on. We look forward to hearing from you about what your agency is doing and how it's going to be meeting its goals.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. And thank you to my fellow panelists, both Lorraine, the leadership that Councilmember Krikorian has had, and really thinking outside the box and being able to be so responsive. And Chris, for what you do in your description, I think it's not an easy issue, homelessness. There is no one solution. I want to give you a brief history lesson of what LAHSA is, because a lot of people see it and don't necessarily understand what its impetus was in its creation, and two, what fits in our responsibilities. And I think, as we'll have conversations later, what kind of comes next. And so this shows how old I am, but I was working for Mayor Tom Bradley in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And at that time, the city of Los Angeles, Mayor Bradley, and at that time, I think it was James Hahn as the city attorney, sued the county of Los Angeles, saying they weren't doing enough on homelessness and that their policies were in fact creating more homeless on the street of LA. And so there was lots of back and forth, and really the aim was to find solutions to homelessness and coordination. And so born of that, fight, one of the resolutions was the creation of this joint powers authority of the city and the county called the LA Homeless Services Authority. And it is 5 members appointed by the mayor. I'm a mayoral appointee, and then there are 5 appointed by the county of Los Angeles. I do like to jokingly say to the mayor that it was my punishment for running against him when we were both together in that last race. But we also had both worked long and hard on homeless issues during my time on the city council with him as well. And so LAHSA, in its infancy, was really more a pass-through agency, literally money that was designated by the federal government or the city county would kind of flow through us. They would tell us where it would go, and there was really little kind of system focus and attention. Over the years, thank goodness, for a variety of reasons, not only additional funding, but the understanding that there really needed to be a system administrator, LAHSA became more than just a funding entity. We do get our funds from federal, from state, from local, both city and county. And with those comes lots of rules and regulations, but the whole idea is to create a system that is going to be able to address homelessness. And Heidi Marston, who is our wonderful new executive director, often talks about 4 different pillars of how to and what we need to do on homelessness. And that was it is focused in on housing, prevention, health and safety, as well as prevention, rehousing, housing, and health and safety, and all of them really having to move together. And one of the challenges that I think that was outlined by the other speakers too was, what kind of housing do you provide? And it has evolved over the years, from even my time at HUD to most recently. And there was a period of time where the focus and attention and demand by the federal government was not to have transitional housing. It was either immediate shelter or permanent housing. And so there was a long period of time where there was not an investment in some of those, I would say, interim or transitional housing. And good reason that conversation happened, because people said, why do you pay money for transitional housing when you could just move into permanent supportive housing? The challenge with that on a national level was California and Los Angeles is different. Housing is expensive to build here, very different than other places that you could easily put up, buy land very inexpensively and be able to put people in them immediately. And it's very different in Los Angeles, but that has changed. And I think I'd like to suggest that COVID, although has been horrible and we would rather we didn't have it, there are some opportunities that have come out of it, and some focus and attention with the leadership of the city and the county. And with the voters, many of you I know who voted for Measure H and Proposition HHH. 2 very different. So to explain that, Measure H is a county sales tax that went through that is specifically for county related programs. And the Measure HHH that was put on by the city of LA is to build permanent supportive housing, and how that we can link those 2 together. LASA has really tried to serve as a system administrator. There are challenges with that. And as mentioned by, I think, both Chris and Lorraine, there are challenges with each individual. They've had 10 years, as you mentioned, Chris, of trauma, or 5 years, and haven't wanted to go in. The only option they may have had to go into a facility may have been a congregate shelter, and they couldn't bring their animal, or they couldn't be with their partner, or they couldn't bring all their stuff necessarily. And so there has been a recognition of the importance of being able to bring that, addressing some of those crises. The biggest challenge, of course, for all of us, and I feel Councilmember Krikorian's pain, as I do for other elected officials being there. There is an immediate kind of demand of, there's an encampment on the corner, send out your outreach workers, call the mental health people, and put them into this local place that we have, and everyone's gonna go. Well, there are challenges with that. There are legal challenges, there are mental health and trust issues. There are a variety of things that make it very challenging. And as a constituent, I share, what the frustration, but the understanding is that this is a problem that took a long time, or has been around for a long time, and to solve it is not necessarily going to be quick as well. And what LASA does in our funding is we fund a number of nonprofit providers, and from the funding that we get both from the county and the city and the state and the federal government to provide some of the services. The direct service that we provide is a coordination. We are only one piece of it, of outreach workers in addition to mental health workers and other places. I think that the good news is that everyone is focused on thinking outside the box and doing new things. And I think Councilman Krikorian's tiny homes, one of the first up, is pretty incredible. And that when people have a safe place, and Project Room Key, which I know we're going to talk a little bit later, I'm not going to go as much into that, Cindy, because I think there were some specific questions on Room Key. But for Project Room Key, what that allowed us to do was to take, in some areas where people said, I'm only going to stay with my friends and I'm not going anywhere that all my friends can't go with me, or I can't take my things, to say, we're going to take all your friends and we're all going to move you into this location. And guess what? When we move you into that location, we're going to have DMV there to help you get your ID so that you can apply for the appropriate programs and funding, and as well as working through DPSS, as well as working with the state and the federal government. And it'll be right there at your location. Instead of trying to find Joe, who was at the corner, I'll just say at Laurel Canyon in the 101, and Joe wasn't there the time that people went out again to see him, and they had something they wanted him to be able to fill out, and they couldn't find Joe again. And then you have to start all over again. So being able to have someone with a place, with a door, a closed door, a bathroom that they can go in, has been really helpful. The numbers that we've been able to serve have been over 6,000 people have been served through the Project Room Key, and we had over 39 hotels and 4,000 beds. And the idea now is really to be able to keep getting people in and getting them to that next, provide them to the housing. But it is very important to note that unless we have a place for them to go, a permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, it is difficult to be able to move anyone without offering them a place to go. And so it still is about creating affordable housing and job economics, all those things that are related to that. I want to, suggest, and I think I could talk forever. I still have that little part of me of being an elected official, or as I call it, recovering politician. But available units is really important. So what we fund is everything from the services for some of these programs to rapid rehousing, which is providing in essence, a voucher for a couple of years for someone to get up on their feet to the next possible area that they'd be able to do. But that means finding a place for them to go. And we have housing navigators that we've been able to fund throughout Los Angeles. The San Fernando Valley is lucky to have places like Chris's programs, like the other that you mentioned as well, Hope of the Valley and LA Family Housing, who are really providing these kinds of services. But the numbers have increased in Los Angeles, not not different than other places in the country where they have seen that. And the prevention is so important. And I will go back to that. It is something that LAHSA contributes some funding to, but a lot of it is ensuring that someone who potentially could be evicted, that we try to help them before they get into the homelessness system, because once they get into the system, it is so much more difficult. Once you lose your place, it is really hard to be able to do. So what LAHSA is trying to do is be that system administrator and to be able to bring all the funds together and provide it to the nonprofits to provide the services, and to be able to create that linkage between the city and the county of Los Angeles that are really the responsible entities, and to be their, their vehicle to be able to do that. Can we all do more? I think we would all say absolutely. Can we all do better? Absolutely. Are there challenges? Absolutely. So I think that the frustration that everyone feels is not unique to you all who are in the neighborhoods. It's the rest of us as well, as we see someone on the street who's mentally ill, and you think, how can they not be in a facility? How can they not, if they're in the middle of the street, how do we interact? Those are some of the challenges that we all face, because it is not just a one size fits all in being able to do that. And so I think I appreciate that we're having this policy on tap conversation, and to be able to look at ways where we can work together. There is really important to be able to do that, and to support leaders like Councilmember Krikorian, who's really stepped up to the plate. And I'm going to stop there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. We didn't even give the cowbell. Congratulations.
I did the cowbell.
Did you? I didn't hear it. Did you hear it, Wendy, the cowbell?
I did not. See, that again, being a recovering politician, you just don't hear those things. You just keep going.
We missed the cowbell, so sorry. Okay, well, anyway, first off, thank you. 3 awesome presentations. That's going to give us so much food for thought as we get into some questions. I see a lot of questions coming in on the chat site, which we'll do later. We're going to get to our prepared questions first. But before we do that, I think we need to say thank you to 3 awesome presentations. So let's give them a great round of applause for their 10 minutes. Or Wendy, yours might have been 11.
It was 11.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, that was fine.
I didn't know. I didn't know either. So
Close. I was close.
You were blessed, yes. So next up, we're going to have each speaker get a question. They'll have 2 minutes to answer the question. Nancy, can you ring the cowbell? Let's see if we can hear it.
Can you hear it?
No.
Really?
Yeah. Can anybody hear it out there? No, there is no cowbell.
Oh, I know why. Hold on. Remember, we minimized my other noise. Hold on.
The background noise.
Hold on. Good point. Hold on one second. I gotta find it.
We gotta test the technology before we take off.
We changed the technology right before we started.
Not my fault.
Now can you hear it?
Yes, good.
Yes.
We could go back and cut it to 10. All righty, so now that we know that the bell rings, we will ring the bell, and here's the magic number, 10 seconds before your time limit. And that way you know your session's coming to a close and you'll need to wrap it up. That's going to be a trick, right?
I'm going to give them 20. I'll give them 20.
Okay, we'll give you 20 then. So let's start with a question first for Lorraine. All right, Lorraine, what is the difference between a tiny house program versus a bridge program? And what is the advantage of the tiny homes approach? You have to take yourself off mute. Maybe we can help you. Naomi, can you take Lorraine off mute?
Mute. Thank you.
There you go.
I'm having technical difficulties. Thank you. So what is the advantage of the tiny home versus the bridge home or interim housing model? As far as the model, they're the exact same model as far as case management on site and who qualifies to go in or who's prioritized for housing. The only difference is where they're living. So in our bridge housing model, we have cubicles, similar to the ones that we all used to have. So cubicles with about a 5-foot, separation between each one. If you stand up, you can see your neighbor. a little cot and a shelf, no door. In our tiny homes model, you have, doors, windows, you have your own air conditioning. So we have both in our district. We have, 2 bridge housing facilities, and then we have 3 tiny home villages coming online. And, oftentimes when you go into the bridge housing facility, it's freezing, because they have to keep it at a very cool temperature because all these bodies, it could overheat, right? But if you're, prone to being cold all the time, like I am, maybe that's uncomfortable for you. So, in this tiny home model, you can adjust your own temperature, you can lock your own door, you can be safe knowing that your items aren't going to get stolen when you go out to meet with your case manager because there's a door that you can lock. Oftentimes people are afraid that their pets are going to get out. They don't want to keep their pet in a crate all the time, but they don't want them to wander either. In this tiny home model, you have all of the, essentially, without the restroom and the kitchen, you have all of the privacy amenities that you and I have where we can, just kind of close the door and leave the world outside and focus on our own, recovery or our own, program plan to move on to our next steps of housing.
Great. I just want to add one little follow-up piece as you have a little more time. How are they in terms of the weather? Are they doing well with rain and with winds?
Yes, so these were meant to be emergency shelters. So I think I mentioned, for hurricanes and fires and floods. So these are meant to withstand 110 mile per hour winds. So oftentimes people say, well, these are just overpriced, tough sheds for your backyard. And I don't know that my little shed in the backyard would withstand a hurricane winds or storms. So they did very well last weekend, or I think it was the weekend before. Right after they opened, we thought, okay, this is going to be the test. Here in the San Fernando Valley, we had these, horrible winds, and then then we had those couple days of rain, and they held up. Not a leak in sight. So that's what we were hoping for. That's what we were sold. So
good. That's great to hear.
Meant to do.
Great, thank you, thank you. We will next move on to Wendy. Your question is: the homeless crisis is getting worse, not better, unfortunately, and it's expected to grow because of the pandemic. Since you became a commissioner, what have you learned, and what approaches have changed based on what you have learned? You mentioned one of them earlier about transitional, but perhaps you could either elaborate on that or touch on some other things.
And one thing I do want to mention, which was someone asked in the chat room, was about shelters during the cold weather and different opportunities. There is a cold weather program that we have that is specifically where there's outreach when there is rain and an expected cold time period. We expand that to the number to accommodate. So for a few weeks ago, when there was a huge obviously downpour, there was extra effort to open additional facilities to be able to do that. That is only during the winter months that we do that. So I think there is a huge fear for the number of people who potentially will be evicted and have had a job loss, et cetera. But I go back to, I'm always the glass is half full, that we've had more attention and focus. And when I know my other question may be around Project Room Key and Home Key, but there has been additional funding that is coming forward that is going to allow us to house people. And that both with the coordination that is occurring between the city and county, partly through Judge Carter and the other issues that have been there. I think what we have found, as noted, I think by you, Lorraine, that having that room, having a place where they can close the door and it is their place. That's why some of these hotel motels have really worked. Others, they're okay to be in a congregate setting, and it is of an emergency nature, and it is still housing. But the more that you can allow them to have a place that they can close that door and have a restroom that they can go to or a shower is really going to help us. And I think that's something we have learned. A lot of people say, oh, they are choosing homelessness. No one really wants to live on the streets. And so if you provide them with something that is going to allow them to have that dignity in housing, you are going to see, and we saw this during COVID, that they are willing to come inside. They are willing to be able to participate in that. So I think what I have learned is if you coordinate and you get all of the players on the same page and rowing in the same direction, that you work cooperatively, that you have the funding available, and then ultimately it is about how affordable housing. affordable housing. As someone asked, what about, people who are the working poor? And there's a lot of them that are living in our safe parking programs and some of the others who work during the day and have nowhere to be at night. And that is a growing number. So it is all about affordable housing in Los Angeles.
Great, thank you. I didn't even hear the cowbell.
I didn't either.
I didn't hear the cowbell. Was there a cowbell?
Yes, it was okay. We're fine.
We didn't hear it. Oh my goodness. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, Chris, the next question is for you. Prior to the pandemic, homelessness was the #1 issue for many businesses and residents in the Valley. While the public has largely been staying at home, how has this affected our unhoused population? And what challenges has the pandemic created in helping the homeless?
Well, the vast majority of our work is in person. It's face-to-face with our homeless consumers, and it always has been that. And there's a quality of the likelihood that the relationship is going to improve and that, our clients will make progress in their lives. And then the pandemic hit, and it made a complicated process even more complicated. And at times it made a frustrating process even more frustrating. And within weeks, we went from our clients coming into our center, hundreds of clients coming to see us, to meet with us in person. Within 3 feet, we would talk to each other within 3 feet all the time. We would handshake, we would give high fives. Our whole work changed within weeks. And the majority of our services went to telemedicine or telehealth. And the majority of our case managers and therapists and even our psychiatrists were all providing services over the phone, which I'm sure you can just kind of imagine how that really impacted our ability to treat our homeless consumers and our homeless neighbors. It's been quite the challenge. On the other hand, as Wendy indicated, most of us are half glass full people that work in this industry. We saw amazing things happen. We were able to communicate. We were able to maintain relationships with most of our consumers with the creation of Project Roomkey and the various bridge housing sites that popped up and the shelters at the various recreation centers all throughout the San Fernando Valley. Those allowed us and assisted us with keeping track of our clients and really having somewhere to find them, having a way to communicate with them, to continue with the treatment, to continue with the process. And I couldn't be more proud of the agency I work for with, going out and finding every PPE you can find, right? Going everywhere to find all the stuff that we had to do to continue to do our jobs. And we did, and we made it happen. This is something that, everybody has indicated. The word unprecedented is just a word that I've heard a lot over the past couple of weeks. And this pandemic definitely shook everything up, and it caused a lot of problems. And I couldn't be more excited about turning it around now. And that's what I'm really focused on, is bringing the clients back to us again so that we can provide that in-person service.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
I heard a dog barking that time.
Yeah, I did too.
That was at the same time as the bells. It was perfect.
That's really on.
So when the dog barks, that's your cue then. Okay.
I'll go get my dog.
Okay. So the next question goes to Wendy, and this is about Project Roomkey. And Wendy, if you don't feel you have enough time to elaborate on this, if there may be an opportunity again when we go into the chat questions and other areas, if you'd like to say a little bit more about that.
I think that Wendy should elaborate on it, and we'll give her time.
You want to do it now?
Well, because there's so much stuff going on with Project Roomkey right now.
Yeah, there is. There is. Okay, so how much time will you give her?
We'll see.
Okay. Jump up and down, Nancy. I'll make sure you're.
Okay, I'll do that.
How about when the dog barks?
I'll make sure you're in front of me.
Okay. So let me just set up the question. So the Project Roomkey is the state's program to use underutilized hotel rooms as living spaces for the unhoused population. And so I think first part of the question would be explain more about that. Second part would be, what is the county's plan for the program once the state and federal funding expires?
Great, thank you so much. And so a couple things. So Project Roomkey was established for a COVID response specifically, because for most of us, we could stay at home if you were in that critical over 65 underlying conditions. And for the homeless, that was not possible. And so the idea was to go and identify those that fit in that category and to be able to lease certain hotels and motels, which the city and the county of Los Angeles did with state funding and CARES Act funding. And additionally, one of the challenges was that so many shelters, including probably Hope of the Valley and I know LA Family Housing, needed to de-densify because of the 6-foot rule. And so therefore, some of those places, which may have, let's just say, had 80 people in them, could now only have 50 people. And so we needed a place for those 30 to be able to go. So it was an immediate response. Everybody worked hand in glove to be able to make that happen. And as I mentioned, there were 4,000 rooms, 39 hotels, and served over 6,000 people. And so there was an effort as those funds were going, we did not think that they would be continued. There was a demobilization effort both in the county and the city of Los Angeles, and time period in which to get people, albeit we were already still trying to house them, into other facilities, whether transitional or permanent housing. We would love for it to be permanent housing. That would be the focus that we would be looking at necessarily. Only 4% of the people who have been in any of these demobilized sites have gone back onto the streets. Not because we didn't offer them something, not because we didn't want to help them, but they chose to do that. So majority have either gone into permanent supportive housing or in another transitional housing facility. The good news is that FEMA is now going to 100% reimburse a local government for the costs associated with providing this. So instead of it only being 75%, yes, very excited about that, it's going to be 100%. That allows the city and the county to continue some of these Project Home Key sites as we're getting the tiny homes up, and we're getting the Project Home Key, which is another state program that's allowing us to buy these hotels and keep them as a resource in the future. And so the mayor and the council have proposed extending some of those home key sites in the city of LA, with the hope that we would have people in just for a couple of months, and then we'd put new in so that we would be able to serve even more people. And we think that that will be through at least September of this next year. And it'll be at the same time that many of these housing projects and transitional facilities are going to open.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next question, which is going to be for Lorraine. Whenever there's new projects like the Tiny House Project, there's always going to be a community reaction. How is the community responding to the tiny homes and the other traditional and supportive housing?
So yes, there is always a community response, not necessarily a positive one, especially initially. Thankfully, with our tiny homes at Chandler, we did have, some, you always get the NIMBYs no matter where you put it. But we also had a very supportive community, both the faith-based community as well as park goers who wanted their park back across the street, who felt like we did need a place to put the people who were living in the park that wasn't the park, so that they could throw their kid's birthday party and not have to worry about, what the park looked like, or, being attacked by someone with, mental illness, who, all these different scenarios. So thankfully we did have the support of the neighborhood council and, other residents nearby. But for other sites, we have experienced a lot of challenges, and we've tried to work with the community. We've walked sites. So for our 2 other sites, we did have a neighborhood that was very much opposed to bringing tiny homes to, everyone assumes that your property values are going to go down. That's the first thing they say, all kinds of things. So we worked with them to see what kind of beautification efforts we could do. In one case, we moved the sewer line a little farther down so that the site could be a little farther set back from the street, not as visible when you're driving, home every day. Little things like that, where people feel like, okay, I was heard and the city is trying to work with me so that I will feel comfortable with this project that's coming in. The other thing that the service provider did that we loved, because, now during COVID, you're always like, well, we can't have any events. They did a drive-through open house where they basically opened up our Chandler site on both ends and let people drive through a couple days before we opened all the doors to the tiny homes so that people could look inside. Hopefully some of you took advantage of that, and drove through and kind of checked it out before it was filled. And that alleviated a lot of people's concerns. What you picture in your mind is always a lot scarier than what than what's in front of you later. So now that we are open and, you know, the nightmare, the monster hasn't developed, people are like, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought. And it, you know, it's beautiful. People acknowledge that, you know, we turned this blighted, vacant lot into, you know, something really nice and architecturally beautiful and useful, because they see that the formerly unhoused in their community are now housed in this tiny little village.
You're getting the bell.
I didn't hear it, but I saw it. Thank you.
Nancy came on with this big bell, so we got to see it. Thank you so much. And before we go on to our next question, for Wendy, I just wanted to mention that we saw today you have a town hall coming up. It's on my phone here on March 18th. So it looks like you're also getting public feedback and community feedback as well. Absolutely. Did you want to address anything on that?
No, we just welcome people coming to that. I think a lot of it, as Lorraine just you know, mentioned, the unknown sometimes is what's scary to people. Whether you're a homeowner or a business owner in the area, or you're a homeless individual who is trying to figure out, you know, where they're going to go. I think the more that we can be transparent and engage people and be able to solve some of those problems. I often say that would you rather have an encampment on the corner, which we have no control over, it's on the sidewalk and we can try to help clean up, or a place over here that is managed by a really reputable nonprofit who will have security and housing and helping those people actually get off the streets. And I think when we have successful programs like the tiny homes in Councilmember Krikorian's district, people will be more willing to accept that. And so I think, Lorraine, what you all have done is to educate people about that.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Let's move over to Chris now for a question. According to the National Coalition for the Homeless, mental illness is the third largest cause of homelessness for single adults. What can be done to proactively address mental health issues before people become homeless? Yeah,
that's a great question. And that is a question that I can talk to about for 7 hours. I did see something in the chat question, a question about having resources like San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center in downtown LA, and indicating that homelessness and mental health is so significant. And you're absolutely correct. And the answer is yes, absolutely. There are DMH operated clinics all throughout Los Angeles and the surrounding counties. There are also DMH contracted agencies such as ours at San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. And you know, and that's just that. We need to educate, right? We need people to understand and know that there are services available all throughout the city and all throughout the county. Also, another important factor is really to dial in and really make it a point to talk about mental illness and talk about mental health treatment, and to continue to fight the stigma that's associated with having a mental illness. Right now, we're in a pandemic, and you don't have to be homeless. You don't have to have a severe and persistent mental illness to be experiencing mental health symptoms. I think the most stable of us are probably experiencing some sort of mental health symptom. During this pandemic, it's been very isolating. It's been very withdrawn, and we need to talk about it. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be shared. Finally, we need funding. To be honest, we need programs that are currently funded to be funded even more, and we need funding programs to be created, not necessarily specifically about housing clients, but about what to do once they're housed and how to keep them to being housed. Stabilization programs, retention programs, really going out and seeing these clients' apartments and working with them in their apartments and outreaching and engaging them and providing them with treatment. We need to really focus on that to prevent homelessness. So that is a huge thing that we need to really kind of give it the attention that it needs. These clients, housing them is not the answer, is not the only answer. We need to help them after they're housed.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So I have a final question for all panelists before we go to the chat box, and I turn it over to Nancy. The final question was, even if we had sufficient housing for everyone, you know, dream a little, if everybody had the opportunity to go to a tiny house or a home or a permanent residence, you know, there are some people who just aren't ready or just not willing to accept help at that time. Can you name what you would do in that situation from your perspective? And Chris, I know you could jump on that in a moment. Lorraine or Wendy, do you want to go first? I
was going to say Chris should go first because he's the most knowledgeable on that. So we'll follow.
And you can build on it. Okay,
Yeah,
we'll do that.
All
right, Chris.
The simple answer is I'm going back and I'm going to talk to that person again and I'm going to offer them help again and I'm not going to give up on them and I'm going to be consistent. That's honest. There are people on the streets right now who are not ready for all this. They're not ready to be housed. They're not ready to address their mental illness or their substance abuse. But if we don't continue to outreach them and we don't continue to offer them help, they're not going to get it. I can't tell you how many clients that I've worked with over the past 7 years that would not be where they are today if they didn't have a case manager or an outreach person going to see them and offering them help 1, 2, 3, 100 times. We need to be consistent. We can't just give up or walk away once somebody says, "Oh, I don't want the help." That's not an answer. We need to continue to go back there politely. We don't want to, be aggressive by any means, but we want to remind them that there are options for them and there is help out there. And more importantly, there are people that want to help them. And if we continue to do that and we continue to engage them and outreach them and show them what we can do for them and the roads that we can lead them, I think it's more likely than not that eventually they're going to say yes.
Chris, go ahead, Wendy. I'm sorry.
Add to that, I think, Chris, that is right on. I mean, I think, again, the frustration from communities oftentimes is, well, you offered them something, why aren't they going? And are the outreach workers doing as much as they can? And I will say our outreach team, as well as those at LASA and others, are really, they go frequently. They develop that relationship with that person so that when they have that right resource for them, who someone says, you know, I really want to live somewhere in this area. I can't go farther. I'm going to have a mental health breakdown if I go X place. I just need to be in this area. That you develop those relationships. Like anyone who may be addicted or, has mental health issues, even if they have a house, it is hard to get them to go into something. And this is just an added kind of challenge. So I think the not giving up, the understanding by all of us that it is going to take sometimes those multiple visits and that establishment of that relationship, and that it is a mental health crisis. It's not just something, I'm going to offer you housing and you're going to go right away. They have had, as you said earlier, Chris, 10 years of trauma, and their lack of trust exists, and it's real.
Lorraine, would you like to add on to anything?
No, I agree, that we all have to work together, even the city and the county government, LASA, the mental health service providers, drug addiction treatments providers, we all need to work together to address the underlying problems and, get people into the housing that the city is building. We all need to work to lift people out of homelessness and, preserve the health and safety of all of our neighborhoods, because, helping them helps all of us.
Great. And Chris, I have a follow-up question before I turn it back to Nancy. And the question is, for the community to really understand this, how long does it really take when you're working with your most, I don't, difficult's the wrong word, but the toughest clients that you have? Could it be a year? Could it be longer? I mean, how long so the community really understands that this is the process?
So yeah, it could be anywhere from, I'd say, 6 months to 10 years. It's a long time process. I've been fortunate enough in my career to develop relationships with individuals who were homeless. And it didn't take very long for me to convince them to give it a shot, to walk through the door, to attend an appointment with a psychiatrist, to try and take an antipsychotic medication, to try and participate in therapy where they develop goals. All the way to us moving them into transitional housing and us giving them a voucher and moving them into an apartment and providing them with services every single day since they signed their lease. That is a regular occurrence through our agency. Sometimes I've been able to do it quickly, and then there's other times where we have to work and we have to work and we have to work, and it does take some time. One of my most greatest success stories that I have, and we always have to focus on our success stories. But there was a time where I was trying to engage a teenager who was living on Skid Row. And it took me 8 times to go down there and sit on the curb with him before he asked me what I wanted, right? So then I said, I want to help you. And I have the option and I have the tools to help you. Would you be interested in it? And he said, no. So I went back and I went back and I went back. And I think after the 15th episode or the 15th visit with this individual, he agreed to get help. He agreed to come with me into the clinic. And last I heard from him, he was working on his bachelor's degree at UCLA in mathematics. So it takes time, right? And there are so many success stories just like that. Yes, there are not so much success stories at times, but it could happen. A real of that is the relationship that one builds and the trust that is developed between the caseworker and the homeless individual. And I can't stress enough the importance of the relationship. But yeah, it could take a while. This isn't a short-term solution.
Thank you, Chris. That ends our prepared questions. And now I'd like to turn it back to Nancy for some of the chat questions and other questions that our audience is interested in asking.
So I've been going through the chat and just making a list so that way we could go through them. I think the first ones have to do more with the tiny homes. Are there any other communities planned or scheduled for the tiny homes for Hollywood and the LA area?
Yes, there are about 17 in the pipeline citywide, 5 of those in the San Fernando Valley. The other 12, I don't remember all the locations, but there are locations planned in a number of council districts.
Do we have an estimate of when those would be open?
So some of them are in different phases. Some of them have already broken ground. Others are in design, and still others are still in the kind of planning stages. I mentioned that we work with the community to try to alleviate some of their concerns, whether that be the number of units we put in a site or the location of the site, things like that. So those are some are still in the feasibility stage, and some were just recently proposed, in the last month or so. So these are things that are moving pretty quickly.
I know you answered some of these questions in the chat, but I don't know if everyone saw them. So are the tiny homes temporary for each individual, or can they stay as long as it takes them to move into permanent housing?
So they're temporary in 2 ways. They're temporary for the city in that we plan to have them there anywhere from 3 to 5 years at the site. They're also temporary for the individual in that they're meant to be there between 3 to 6 months, but we don't plan on making anyone homeless after 6 months. So as long as they're, meeting with their case manager, meeting with their housing navigator, working through their program to take those steps to get into permanent housing, we'll continue to, extend their housing. But if, they're kind of dodging their case manager or dodging their housing navigator, then maybe we won't be, so generous with the timeline, but it really does depend on each individual.
Okay. I'm trying to monitor the chat at the same time. How are the tiny homes communities funded? And how long is the process to create from land acquisition to the client moving in?
So the tiny homes, and I don't have that in front of me, they were funded partially from the general fund and partially through some of these CARES dollars. And then the land acquisition hasn't been an issue because we're primarily looking at city-owned lots. However, once we break ground, it's 90 days. The contractor has 90 days to turn it over and open it. So these are very quick. Once we identify a site and we get it into design, it's really quickly from there. We broke ground on Halloween for Chandler, and we opened on February 1st. In spite of COVID, in spite of the holidays, in spite of all these other things, we still opened on time.
Is there a reason that we're not looking at building multi-story buildings to take advantage of a larger lot versus the tiny homes? Because that same lot could be developed into a 3-story apartment that would house 3 times more than a tiny development.
So, kind of going back to what I just mentioned, we can get these up in 90 days. I'm certain that in Los Angeles, we could not build a 3-story apartment building in 90 days. Also cost, definitely a lot longer to build and a lot more expensive to build, something more permanent. We do have more permanent things in the pipeline, as far as permanent supportive housing and affordable housing units and things like that. But these sites are meant to be temporary. All of our sites are on underutilized parkland that we do have to give back to the park at some point. So they're only meant to be there between 3 to 5 years. It would be a waste of resources to build a 3-story apartment building and then knock it down in 3 years because we need to give them back the parkland. These are meant to be temporary sites while we build those, Triple H permanent supportive housing units that are already in construction.
Is there a website that shows all these different locations that maybe you could put that in the chat when you get a chance?
So I'll put our website that lists our locations. Unfortunately, there's not currently a citywide one unless the mayor's office has one that I'm unaware of. But because the projects are kind of coming online so quickly, it's been a little challenging to kind of get the media part of it out quickly, especially because the designs change and sometimes the locations even change. So, but I'll note that for maybe a future project.
I mean, I can find, if we have a list, I'll share it with Nancy for the citywide, countywide efforts.
Oh, great. That's great, Wendy.
Thank you.
How large a parcel is necessary to build these tiny home communities?
So we're looking at lots that are at least 20,000 square feet in size, just so that we can get enough units to have it pencil out, basically. We don't want to put 10 units because then, the cost and expense of bringing in a sewer line and the hygiene trailer and then the administrative staff and all these other things, it really doesn't pencil out. It would be more expensive than the number of people we were helping. So, I think a minimum number of units would be about 30. So if you could, oftentimes community members are the ones who kind of go out and drive and they know their community. And if they know that there are vacant lots that, would kind of work, they can't be on a steep hillside. They can't be, under the power lines. We're always challenged by these other things, but for the most part, they can be about 20,000 square foot or larger, and preferably city owned or some government entity owned.
Okay, thank you. So Wendy, I think this is a question for you. What are the plans to help the unhoused people who are working, the people who've become unemployed without housing now with COVID, and the single moms and dads who are also homeless?
So I think, there is a family kind of service center and that helps with the rapid rehousing, as well as some people who are utilizing the safe parking programs. And I think, Lorraine, you guys have at least 1 or 2 safe parking programs, I know, in your district for those. But there is a whole family system, which is a priority in helping families get housed. And oftentimes that's the rapid rehousing program that's funded partially through city funds and coming from the federal government, that allows for that kind of voucher program where we're trying to help with these housing navigators find them a place to stay. We prioritize, as everyone does, to get families off the street as quickly as possible.
Could you elaborate a little bit on there's different types of housing. There's transitional, there's rapid rehousing, now there's the tiny homes. Can you just explain what those different ones are?
Yes, I will try. So I will try from the, kind of the first entry. So there are emergency shelters. Those are congregate living facilities that you go in and it's cots. It's oftentimes a rec and park site that may be, or a church that's used during the cold weather programs. And then there are some that are year round as well. Additionally, then there's a bridge home programs have a little bit more privacy. The cubicles, I think is described by someone. Those are ones that are all over the city. I'm not sure, Lorraine, how many I should that there are, but I think there's either 15 or 18 in maybe they hope to have that many as well. And then from that, you start looking at some of these other tiny homes / pallet shelters to the project room key, temporary places for people to go. And then there are 2 kinds of kind of almost permanent. There's permanent supportive housing, which is subsidized housing that people will be able to live in, and that includes places where they might have a Section 8 voucher they can take. Rapid rehousing is for a couple of years, and that allows you, in essence, have a voucher that helps you kind of get back on your feet for those couple of years. I think it is important to note for the question that Lorraine had, and sorry, the sun moves in my room and I keep moving and it keeps still hitting me in the face, but it is that sometimes a deadline, and Chris, you may be, kind of from the mental health side, a deadline for people knowing that they have to do something is often useful. And we're finding that in some of these places, which say you can only stay for this amount of time. And in that time, we need you to make these kinds of steps to get housed. And it's like all of us, this is not unique to someone who is homeless. If you give me a deadline, I work towards that deadline. So I think that with the understanding that we are compassionate about ensuring that they, if there are other challenges and we don't have somewhere to go, we're not kicking them out. But I think it is that kind of push-pull.
And I have kind of a follow-up question. I think, to that. If, well, maybe I don't. I just lost it. I think I already asked it. Okay, I'll get back to that one. We have a lot of questions in the queue. So and I want to kind of see if I can find something here for Charles to answer. And this one might be both for Wendy and Charles, because I'm sure some of it's going to have to do with the outreach portion of it. You know, there's a lot of people who, as we already mentioned, don't want help. And they probably don't want to go to tiny homes or any of these Project Room Key or any of these other programs out there. Can a KOA, for the people who want to stay in tents on the street, can a KOA type campground or some sort be set up somewhere like somewhere in the Sepulveda Basin and turn it into a campsite for the homeless? That way they're in one place. They can also have a case manager there to help them. Similar, I want to say, to what Bob Bloomingfield has behind his office, but more on a permanent basis where they'd be relocated from the streets.
So I will, and maybe I have PTSD, so I'm going to say this on, there was an urban campground during my time with Tom Bradley that was downtown. And the idea was to do it in that way. And there are some challenges when you put that many people in a outside area. Security is really important part of that. You have to have restrooms, you have to have showers, you have to have a lot of other things. A lot of costs for something that could better be spent on a tiny homes kind of project or a housing voucher. And so, not that it isn't something that people can consider on a temporary basis, I would say, but I think normalizing it is something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend from my perspective, historical perspective of dealing with the issue of homelessness.
Charles, a lot of the, I see this all the time on some of these Facebook groups for homelessness and everything, and they talk about the mental health issues and that the people with mental health illness will never want to be helped, and that they're just a bunch of druggies and there's nothing that we can do. And they're opposed to the tiny homes. They're actually, to me, they're not solution finders. They're just people who want to complain. What is your agency and other agency, Chris, I told you, Charles, Chris, what in other agencies are you guys doing to address this?
So first and foremost, like I said before, is it comes down to the relationship of the individual. You got to remember that these clients that we see on the streets, these individuals that we see on the streets who are sleeping in tents or who are standing by the corner panhandling for change outside your car, they all have stories and they all have histories, and most of them have at one time or another been housed successfully. They are human beings, they're citizens, they are a part of our community. Something happened, something terrible happened, something led them there. And after they ended up on the streets, they've been exposed to, like I said before, many, many, many traumas, from being ignored by people who walk by them every single day, to being sexually abused, being physically abused. Many of them have been manipulated over and over and over again. There tends to be a hierarchy amongst the homeless population. So these people are humans, and we have to really kind of break it down to the bare minimum and understand that, they have problems and they have real life problems. And to add the pandemic that's happening right now, it's just very overwhelming. So, once again, my goal and our goal as a center is really to break down those barriers and to find the person that was once housed, that was once doing okay, and help them get back to that place, if not get better. It's hardening. It's really disheartening to see homelessness. Nobody likes to see it. It's really hard to not look away from it. But what's even harder, what I find, is that right now, at least in the past few years, we've housed hundreds of people, and we've helped house hundreds of people move out of homelessness and into permanent housing. And the worst thing that I see is when they get eviction notices before they even have the opportunity to change their address with the DMV. And that's even worse. So you see somebody who went through the years of homelessness finally get into an apartment, finally get somewhere where there's a locked door, and then for whatever reason, most likely they didn't have the skills necessary to keep that apartment, that yellow piece of paper shows up on their door. And that's even twice as hard as disheartening, and that's something that we see. And another thing on that note is we have an eviction moratorium that was established towards the beginning of this pandemic. It's going to end And I am fearful, and my colleagues are fearful about what's going to happen when that happens. So that's another thing that we're really concerned with, and that we're trying to prepare for and trying to problem solve that issue.
Well, and the eviction moratorium has been a concern for us because we know it's going to end. And, it's been keeping thousands of residents in their home. And maybe, I don't know if maybe Wendy or Lorraine can even answer this. Are there plans to help people transition out of this emergency moratorium, so that when it expires, what are people going to do to stay in their homes? Anyone can answer that?
I think it's more of a city question than a loss, because in the prevention, I mean, I think, as we mentioned earlier, the more that you can keep people in their homes before that, before they are evicted, it's less expensive than it is if someone loses their house and then you have to help them get into the services and have their first and last month's rent and some of those other things. So I think there's a program, Lorraine, sorry to put you on the spot, but I do think there are some efforts that they're doing as far as helping with some of those eviction prevention programs.
Okay, great.
Right.
Oh, Lorraine, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, we are working with LAHSA. Right now, LAHSA's going through and kind of training all of our staff and all of council staff and just anyone who interacts with the homeless on a city or county side to train us on problem solving, programs that are out there for people to prevent them from becoming homeless. So, someone who's perhaps behind on their rent, maybe helping them work with the landlord to get more time, or connecting people to family resources or friend resources where maybe they can stay instead of, going onto the street, or just connecting them with the right programs, because, every situation is different. But that way we all have access to the same information and we're all giving out the same information, so that we're not sending people all over the place saying, well, I think there's a program over here. We think there's a program over here. We want to have, a central place where we can give people accurate information, because as you all know, this is all changing. As we get closer to the eviction moratorium ending, I'm sure we'll have more information than we have now. But right now, we are looking at what steps we can take to prevent people from falling into homelessness.
Are there any special projects for veteran housing?
So the city doesn't build specifically veteran housing, but veterans are, welcome at any of our sites. But funny you should ask. Our office is working with the mayor's office and the West LA Veterans Administration, who is also looking to build their own tiny home village on their lot. So, there are discussions to build sites like this specifically for veterans.
And there are a number of federal programs, and there was a big push a few years ago too, and Section 8 vouchers for veterans. And one of the things we need desperately is, and this is also reflected in even our rapid rehousing, is apartment owners that are willing to take Section 8s. Oftentimes we have a number of veterans or others who have a Section 8 in their hand and cannot get a place where they can go. And it is either one, there's not as much affordable housing that they need, but sometimes it's also misconceptions of someone who walks in with a Section 8 voucher. I would say even a little bit of discrimination, thinking that they're going to be a problem tenant or whatever. And in many ways, when you have a Section 8 voucher, you are guaranteed that landlord is actually guaranteed for that funding, once they're there with that Section 8. So it's kind of a benefit. And we did this post 94 earthquake when I was at HUD, provided these, and those vouchers were like gold for so many that did not have enough people to come into some of their apartments.
You mentioned Project Room Key, expanding this year, and having more space and more time that we're going to be doing it. And I wanted just to touch on the issue of how they're saying that the LAHSA or the county is going to mandate businesses or commandeer properties. Is that a reality? I mean, because business, we feel obviously as a chamber that businesses should have the opportunity to do what they see fit with their properties.
I know it's not anything that LAHSA is necessarily pursuing. Of course, the best thing would be for people to be willing to sell their properties. We know that I think hotels and motels have changed over the years, and it is important for there to be looking at some of those that aren't going to be able to rent the next year. And this is going to be a guaranteed, ability to have that income. I never thought, I must say, a little pessimistic that we'd be able to get 39 hotels in the county of Los Angeles to accept and be locations. And they were, and knock on wood, not everything was perfect, but it was better than I think people anticipated. And two, they had income that they otherwise would not have had by this program. So I think the priority we have is to get willing owners to sell or to do that reasonably. There are some that say, oh my gosh, there's money for this, we're going to jack up the prices of those hotels, and we're not going to do that.
The Olympics are coming up, and this is a question we ask everyone. And, we know there's issues with certain other groups that, we have to be careful what we say sometimes, but what is the plan? Are we going to continue to expand housing? What is there like a plan looking toward the future, the next 7 years, of what we can do for our homeless community with the Olympics coming up? Don't all chime in at once. I mean, there might not be yet, but obviously our office is by the Sepulveda Basin, and there's already, they're going to be cleaning that area out probably to expand for the games. And what's the plan for those people who are living in the basin?
So I think the Olympics are kind of irrelevant in a sense to homelessness, in that we're not about, we, the city, are not about kind of cleaning up for an international audience. This is not your mother-in-law coming to check for dust. This is a crisis. This is, we need to respond to a humanitarian crisis, and we need to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness in our city ASAP. So this isn't about the Olympics down the line, or what are we going to do for the Olympics? This is what we need to do now. And this is what we needed to do yesterday, but we're doing it now. So that's kind of our mindset as far as what are we doing to address homelessness. We're doing it now.
Well said, Lorraine. Yes, it's an emergency, not a crisis, and that's the important part. And I think we have resources that we haven't had before. That Measure HHH, the Measure H dollars, and now and out of COVID, some dollars that we wouldn't have otherwise seen, and now incumbent upon us. If all of these things happen, we're going to be creating a number of units. And I think it is, Lorraine aptly described it. Couldn't have said it better, Lorraine.
We have a lot of questions, but I know we're not going to be able to get to them before we finish. And I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to make some closing statements. Cindy, you want to take over again?
Yes, absolutely. So why don't we start with Wendy, if you could give us your closing statement, and we'll work Lorraine and Chris.
I just want to say thank you to you, Cindy, and to Nancy, and to all of those that you participated today, and my fellow panelists. I think closing and saying, one, we all have to do more. All of us, and whether that is government or nonprofit or businesses, to solve this problem. I think two, that it won't happen overnight, and we have to understand that these are individuals and individual lives and trauma that has occurred. And three, we can also, I know, do better. And so improvement and even criticism, as much as no one likes it, we accept it. And how can we do better? And I think if we can go with that engagement as to educate one another about the challenges and the problems, but more importantly, I think it is about ensuring that we provide more housing and get people off the street, whether or not it is because they've lost their job or can't afford a place to live, or they're, have mental illness or other things. They are individuals, and it is, we never call them in again the homeless, because that doesn't really explain that it is a person experiencing homelessness. It's not just the homeless, and it is a person. And so I look forward to working with all of you. This is my volunteer effort, but I care, and I care about San Fernando Valley. I'm not only born and raised in the Valley, but still live in the Valley, represent in the Valley. And I think we are the best of Los Angeles, and together we can do anything. And thank you to your wonderful chamber that I've enjoyed being part of for so many years.
Thank you for everything you've done for us.
Yeah, thank you. And Nancy, did you want to tell them we're celebrating how many years?
Oh, 110 years in one day. Yesterday we turned 110.
Happy
Yay.
birthday.
I'll have to change my background for that.
Nancy, you don't look a day over.
I know, right? I don't look 110 in one day.
Yeah. All right, so Lorraine, why don't we go to you for your closing remarks?
Thank you. I also want to thank you all for putting on this event. I think we've had a great discussion. I've learned things from the other speakers as well. So thank you for all the presenters. I would also like to piggyback on, Wendy's call for action items and, encourage all of you to get involved, even if that means in little ways. So oftentimes when we want to build, bridge housing or permanent supportive housing or all these different initiatives to help people experiencing homelessness, we hear, from those loud squeaky wheels that say, don't build this, don't do this. But then we also hear from the ones that are, they don't want people under their underpass. They don't want people in tents near their home. And it's kind of, you can't really have it both ways. We have to have somewhere to send them, some alternative to give them if we want to get them off of our sidewalks. So if you're not opposed, if you kind of feel like, oh, that's okay, it doesn't sound so bad, we want to hear from you too. So, definitely reach out to your elected offices, reach out to, your council offices, reach out to LAHSA, or reach out to your neighbors. Even just those conversations among neighbors can lead to great conversations, get to know your neighbors, but also, good discussions about what we do and don't want for our neighborhoods. Not necessarily like, obviously, no one wants to see people living in the street. No one wants to live in the street. But we have to start thinking about solutions. I like what Nancy said about how, people sometimes on social media are not, they're not solution finders. They're just there to kind of gripe. And I think we all need to kind of take that hat and be solution finders. And some of the ways that we can do that are, I've really been encouraged actually by the outpouring of support and love for our tiny home village, because it did get, so much press for being the first one. We've had everything from, groups reaching out with fleece blankets. We had a company that donated a bunch of house plants, because everyone feels more at home when you have a plant to take care of, and water. And all those things have helped to make our first, round of participants feel so welcome. And we want to extend that, beyond just our tiny home village. We want to make all of the people experiencing homelessness feel welcome into our community, into our society. Those are those steps to transition out of homelessness. It's to feel like you are a part of something, part of the greater good of, Angelinos. So thank you all for putting this on. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. And Chris?
Yeah, I second everything that's been said. This has been a great experience, and I thank you so much for allowing our agency to be a part of it. This is not an easy topic to talk about, and it's difficult. There are a lot of really kind of disheartening things happening right now when it comes to homelessness and mental illness as a whole. And the most important thing we can do is to talk about it and be okay with it, and understand that there are things out there, or there are agencies out there that are here to help. If anybody has any further questions, or they want to, look at more into our agency, we do have a website. It's called movinglivesforward.org. It talks about all the various programs our agency has and the various individuals that we serve. I'd also encourage you to look at the LA HOP website as well. There is an area on the website. I don't have it, Wendy. You might be more familiar with it, where you can actually indicate or enter concerns you have regarding specific populations and individuals that you see on the streets. And then outreach teams will be sent out to talk to those people, at least to begin the conversation, right? Because the conversation has to begin. We can't just simply say to ourselves, oh, that person doesn't want help, when nobody has in fact asked that person if they want help. It's very easy to assume that somebody is living on the streets because they choose to, or because they're using drugs, when in fact nobody's asked them if they're living on the streets because they choose to, or because they're using drugs. So we need to talk with our homeless neighbors, and we need to ask them, quite frankly, is there something that we could do to help you today? Is there somebody I can talk to? Or is there a referral I can make for you? Not necessarily, I might not be able to give you $1 out of my pocket, but maybe, hey, there's this agency that I heard about. It's called San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center, and they help homeless people, right? So we need to have the conversations. I encourage you, don't be afraid of walking down the street and saying hi and acknowledging their presence. Could you imagine just being on the streets and having 50 people walk past you and not one person looks at you, or not one person says hi, or not one person gives you a smile? And that's what our neighbors are experiencing right now. So once again, I thank you all for allowing us to be a part of this. I'm very excited that I got to be here with you all today, and I wish you the best.
Marcy put the link in the chat for the hop.
Great. Thank you, Marcy.
Can I take a quick screenshot of everybody here on the panel? Cindy, Nancy in the panel, so you guys can look. Lovely.
Smile.
Okay, got it. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, Nancy, well, I'll throw it to you to close her up.
All of our pictures are on Zoom now. They all kind of look the same, right? First of all, I do want to thank the San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center as one of our many homeless agencies that are within the chamber. I know on our call today is also Chrysalis, who's another member that helps with job placement. We have the San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission. So we have a lot of agencies within the chamber, and they're your go-to. And if you need any assistance reaching out to them to find the right agency, let us know. We're happy to connect you if with them or LASA or with someone at one of the council members' offices. Please let us know. I want to say again, thank you to our guests. I thought it was great. It's always nice to see everyone, and welcome Chris to joining our future of panels that we're going to have. We'll probably call on you again for the future. I also want to thank our moderator, Cindy, who's our past board chair, because we kind of threw this at her like a week ago, telling her she was going to be the moderator, and she did a great job. And I want to express our appreciation to our sponsors, California Lutheran University and to Southern California Gas Company, for making today's Policy on Tap possible. I also want to introduce and thank Scott Schmidt. Scott, I'm going to highlight you, so you better be careful. So Scott is new to our team as our coordinator for Policy on Tap. Some of you may know him from his days at VICA many, many years ago. And you may be hearing from him or seeing him again as we continue our Policy on Tap series. The next one will take place on March 16th. We're going to be discussing healthcare, and we're tentative featuring